Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to dive into the fascinating and honestly incredibly messy gap between how science should ideally work and how it actually happens in the real world. We're often taught that the scientific method is this perfect, flawless loop of totally objective steps. But the reality of doing research, well, especially when your subjects are complex, living, breathing people, it is so much more chaotic than that. We're going to explore the really unique challenges researchers face out in the field, the specific hurdles of conducting human interviews, and why maintaining a super healthy dose of scientific doubt is actually a researcher's absolute most valuable tool. So, to kick things off, let's just ask the big question. How does science actually work when your subjects are human beings? It's a critical question, and it really frames our entire exploration today. Because think about it, right? When you're measuring the boiling point of water, the water doesn't have an opinion on the thermometer. But in the social and behavioral sciences, the whole game changes. Your subjects think, they feel, and they react to you. So here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with 1, the human challenge in research, move into 2, transparency versus privacy protections, then look at 3, the slippery slope to fraud, 4, the crucial role of doubt, and finally wrap up with 5, philosophy, parsimony, and science. Okay, let's jump right into section 1, the human challenge in research and why studying people is incredibly complex. It all boils down to this. A human being is not an atom. Atoms are incredibly predictable. They're literal, they don't react to being observed by a scientist. But human beings, we are entirely subjective. We assign our own complex meanings to things. Look at it this way. If you physically push an atom, it just moves. If you push a human being, they don't just move physically, they react emotionally. They assign meaning to why you push them, and they push back. This creates a massive challenge for researchers trying to maintain their objectivity when their subjects are actively reacting to them in real time. Let's look at how this plays out in a real-world interview. Imagine you're a researcher sitting across from someone asking them about friendship. Now, you might have a very strict academic definition in your head, but to the person you're interviewing, friendship might mean a casual acquaintance online, or it might mean a lifelong ride-or-die confidant. The definition completely changes depending on who you happen to be asking. As a researcher, you're just sitting there hoping they understand the words you're using in the same way you do, but they are always assigning their own unique meaning to them. It makes exact measurement during interviews incredibly tricky. You have to be so adaptable. Moving right along to section 2, transparency versus privacy protections, the tug-of-war of sharing data. So a researcher's work is literally never truly done. The ideas they gather from these really complex human interviews have to run a grueling gauntlet of continuous, open scrutiny. It usually starts at conference presentations, where academics get together for live and honestly sometimes intense debate. From there, it goes to anonymous peer review. This is where journals send the work out to other experts to check it over without knowing who wrote it, which removes the bias of status. And finally, even post-publication, the transparency continues through blogs and open data sharing. The whole ecosystem is built to be entirely open to other scientists. But wait, here is the huge flip side to all that openness. When you're dealing with living, breathing human subjects, researchers face a massive ethical challenge regarding privacy. If someone shares a deeply traumatic or personal story during a one-on-one interview with you, we absolutely cannot just dump those sensitive narratives onto the open web just for the sake of transparency. It's just not as simple as demanding that all data be completely open all the time. And this creates a really fascinating historical tension. Because in the past, the necessity of privacy was actually weaponized. Bad actors in the scientific community would use privacy as a convenient excuse to hide sloppy data and avoid scrutiny. They'd basically say, well, I can't show you my proof because it's totally confidential. So what's the modern solution? Universities are now solving this by allowing limited, highly controlled data access, strictly within verified, trusted peer research communities. That way, another researcher can actually verify the work, keeping the science honest without ever violating the subject's right to privacy. Which brings us to section 3, the slippery slope to fraud, when absolute certainty replaces methodology. There is a very real, very dangerous slippery slope of sloppy science. Things go off the rails when a scientist forgets one of the absolute most important tools in their kit, scientific doubt. When a researcher becomes completely certain that they already know how the world works, they basically stop caring about proper methods. They stop sharing their data, because in their mind, they already know the answer anyway. This absolute certainty replaces methodology, and it leads to a steady, scary descent from just being sloppy straight into outright intentional fraud. 600 to 900. That staggering number represents the amount of casualties reported in a completely fabricated genocide. And this brings us to the infamous Babak's case, which is a chilling example of exactly what happens when scientific doubt completely vanishes. So, an anthropologist named Bax was conducting field research in the former Yugoslavia during the war. Now, doing research in a war zone is undeniably chaotic and difficult. While he was there, locals told him stories claiming these horrific mass killings had occurred. But instead of applying rigorous methodology and actually verifying those claims, Bax simply believed what he heard in these informal interviews. He completely lacked scientific doubt. Because a local told him, he felt he didn't even need to double-check it. He ended up publishing findings about a genocide of hundreds of people that literally never happened. And the absolute worst part? He stubbornly stood by those findings and kept publishing them, even after he knew for a fact it was wrong. It's a tragic, real-world lesson about the disastrous consequences when a researcher abandons doubt. Let's pivot to the antidote in Section 4, the crucial role of doubt. Why being unsure is actually a researcher's superpower. I love this quote. Look at how this researcher responded when someone asked why they change their theories so often. That's usually what I do when I find out I'm wrong. I change my mind and I find a better hypothesis. Isn't that great? Doubt is not a weakness in science. It's a required strength. The whole philosophy of science reminds us that we are never fully 100% sure. Embracing scientific doubt is exactly what allows us to correct our course when we inevitably get things wrong. Science is about never being 100% sure. Researchers are human beings, remember? We're not billiard balls. We have our own quirks and subjective traits. A researcher might have super strong political views, or, just a really strong personal opinion about loving cats. Because researchers are human, those opinions are going to naturally creep into their research. It's just unavoidable. That's why scientists have to use constant, active doubt to reflect on their own views and maintain absolute transparency about their biases. Let's bring it all home with Section 5, Philosophy, Parsimony, and Science, Ancient Tools for Modern Research Realities. Have you ever heard the concept of parsimony? It dates all the way back to the 11th century with a guy named Occam. You might know Occam's razor. It's this scientific and honestly kind of aesthetic principle that a simpler explanation is often way better than a highly complex one. For a lot of scientists, there is a profound beauty in parsimony. Finding one simple, elegant rule that can explain a massive amount of stuff, that's the dream. But as you might guess, it has some pretty major limitations when you try to apply it to the social sciences. Because there is a serious clash here. Simple rules work wonderfully in fields like economic modeling, where you can sort of strip away all the messy nuance. But when you're doing qualitative research, like deep interviews with real people, the world is incredibly nuanced. If you want to understand something deeply complex, like why a person becomes radicalized, a simple mathematical rule just isn't going to cut it. You can't use parsimony on context. Human actions require loads and loads of messy, complicated details to be truly understood. Which brings us to epistemology. Now, I know it sounds like really dry, dead academic jargon, but it's actually just the philosophical study of how we acquire knowledge about the world out there. Like, how do we know what we know? Are we getting knowledge by measuring things really rigidly, or are we getting knowledge by interviewing people and interpreting human meaning? This concept isn't just theory. It's the absolute foundation of how any researcher decides to look at reality. See, researchers are always caught in these epistemological frames, even if they don't consciously realize it. Some folks inherently believe the only valid way to learn is through hard, rigid measurement in numbers. Others believe the only true way to learn is by sitting down, doing long interviews, and interpreting human meaning. When you put those two totally different types of scientists on the exact same multidisciplinary team, you get an epistemological clash. They aren't just arguing about the data, they're literally arguing about the very nature of how human beings can understand the world. And that brings us to the end of our explainer, because at the end of the day, we aren't just talking about scientists in a lab. You, me, all of us, we all operate within our own hidden frameworks. Whether we naturally prefer cold, hard numbers or messy, complicated human stories, those preferences totally dictate our reality. So I'll leave you with this. How do your own epistemological biases secretly shape the way you view the world around you? Take a moment to reflect on that doubt, and hey, maybe use it to find a better hypothesis today. Thanks so much for learning with me.